Hare Krishna, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today I am taking a question that I received from one of my Bhakti channel viewers. This question is loaded, and I sat looking at it for a couple of days. I got it over the weekend, and and frankly, I just didn't want to answer it because A, I'm not. Who am I to try and answer a question as big as this one? And B, it's a scary time to try to answer a question because, in some ways, a lot of people are really traumatized right now on a lot of different levels, economically, from the pandemic, from due to racial injustice and systemic oppression. There's so many different storylines that are really blowing up right now in the world. And so to answer a difficult question about karma, which is what this question is about, um, during a time when people are grieving and understandably and necessarily emotional, it felt to me like maybe a task that was not the right time, right? Then I thought about it more, and I thought, no, this is the kind of question that we ask while we're grieving, that we may not be able to fully process or accept while we're grieving or while we're feeling traumatized. It doesn't turn off, negate, or override the feelings that we have, and it's not meant to. But it is also natural during times of trauma to ask deep questions about the nature of reality, of God, the soul, and of karma. And so I decided today to just go for it. I'm just going to try my best to give an answer based on what I've learned from the yogic scriptures, the yogic tradition, my guru, my other teachers, and my own practice of yoga for many years now. Okay, so I'll try. So here's the question. How do we address the karma of what is happening in the world? It feels callous to say that George Floyd deserved what happened to him because that was just his karma. This is for, I'm sure most of you know, but since I have people who watch this from all over the world, in the United States right now, there are protests, demonstrations, even riots, due to a black man who was murdered by the police. So his name was George Floyd. And this person is saying that if we believe in karma, one would say that this was George Floyd's karma. So that's it. And that feels callous. And believe me, if that was the story, I wouldn't be into yoga and I wouldn't believe in karma myself, because I also think that that's heavy-handed and callous to say, oh, that's just his karma. So the question goes on and says, how can I understand this? Because I believe in karma, but I'm struggling not to do victim blaming either. I suppose this could be applied to other atrocities like the Holocaust, etc. It's like, you can see why I looked at this and I was like, oh my God, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's such a heavy question. And, I would be a complete liar if I said that these were not questions that I have asked myself many times, especially when I was first getting into Bhakti Yoga and studying the Shastras. This was like one of the primary blocks for me to getting into yoga and karma and even astrology in the beginning, was that I can't just sit back and go like, this person was murdered or raped, or this genocide or this atrocity is just because they deserve it because they did something bad in the past. Nope, that's not for me. I don't believe in that. I'm not down with that, right? So, but what I found as I continued to study the Yoga Sutras, the Puranas, the Upanishads, the Vedas, the Bhakti tradition in particular, is that that's actually not an accurate description of the laws of karma and what's really going on in relation to the soul and its karma. So I'll try to offer just a few brief, explanations that may help. Okay, so let's begin with the first response that I created. I kind of am pausing these and numbered them and kind of gathering my thoughts with each one. So the first one is that karma is multiple. What does that mean? It means that the analogy that I used in a recent post that I wrote was of a storm. When a storm comes, it's based on a confluence of natural forces, different pressure systems meeting, different temperatures meeting in different regions in the sky. In this sense, the forces of karma that are at work in our lives do not come from one cause or one cause in our personal past. They come from a wide variety of causes, some of which exist in our personal past based on personal decisions that we've made consciously. Some exist in our personal past, in past lives, in things that we have participated in unconsciously. Some of the forces that come together to form events in our lives come from the influences of other people's karma, of the karma of other beings and environments. So when a storm comes together, it has multiple forces and layers and levels at which it is combining to, dump rain, let's say. Karma is multiple in what it achieves as well as in how it is formed. So the causes are multiple, they're not singular. So you can't tell simple little stories like if you murder someone, it's because you murdered. Or if you get murdered, it's because you murdered someone or something like that. It's not that simple. There could be an element of truth to something like that, but it's not so easily identified. Just like it's not easy to look at a storm and go like, well, what caused that? Oh, it's just this one thing. So there's multiple factors that combine to bring about events in life, and some of them are in our personal past, in conscious things that we did, and in unconscious things that we did. Some of them are part of collective forces that are very conscious that we can identify. Some of them are from unconscious collective forces that we can't always readily identify. So think about that. It's so multiple. It's the word that really helps to use is the word multivalent. It's like a tapestry. At the center there's a jewel, but then there's radiating outward all around in all directions, multiple patterns that reflect that central jewel. And it, in a storm, has a sense of cohesion to it, like the central jewel. But the forces that have combined reflect a manyness. So there's a manyness and a oneness that are combining. So anyway, that's a little esoteric, but if you can imagine that, then you're on the right track to understanding why someone dying in a brutal, unjust way is not just simply, well, they did something bad and so they're getting something bad. So there's a confluence of forces, causal factors, both personal and impersonal, both natural and collective, personal and collective. So it helps to also remember that karma is multiple in what it does, not just in how or why it happens, but also in what outcomes it provides. So, for example, karma, in this case, people could say, you could just as easily say that someone who dies in an unjust manner is part of something that is just in the world. For example, when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, arguably one of the darkest days in American history and civil rights history, certainly. But I think it was within a week of him dying that, due to the protests and riots that happened in the wake, the Civil Rights Act was passed, if I remember correctly. So, and I'm not trying to say that I have some clairvoyant understanding of why anything happens either. But it is to say that what looks like something very bad or unjust is often the seed of an incredibly beautiful and just transformation that happens for other people. Our deaths are not just our own. Our lives are not just our own. Our karma is not just our own. We don't exist in a vacuum, and it's not a morally punitive universe either. There is morality, there is justice karmically, but it is multiple, it is multivalent. What karma accomplishes is many. It accomplishes many things for many purposes. So when I mentioned this in my writing, some people, when a storm comes, they're well sheltered. The storm scares them, and maybe by scaring them changes their attitude or their behavior in some way. For another person, they're not well sheltered by the storm, and it devastates their life. For someone else, the storm may be the rain of plenty that they needed because their crops were about to die. So storms are multiple in what they achieve and the outcomes that they affect. The forces and causes of karma are multiple. The outcomes are multiple. And so if we want to understand karma, we have to think in terms of the multivalent sophistication, complexity, and beauty of reality. Also, the next point, so that leads me to point number 2. Let me pause for a second. Okay, so that point number 2, karma is multiple and karma is mysterious. Mysterious meaning we can't understand it. We get enough of a glimpse of understanding karma if we are in a spiritual practice and we pay attention to the events of our own lives and the outcomes of our own lives to see that it is meaningful and that it is designed for the evolution and growth of our soul and for all beings. But that perspective is not a unicorn rainbow picture of positivity. It is complex, it involves suffering, and it is mysterious. And we're instructed by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita not to pretend that we know what's going on. Because he says that in all ways, the greatest sages don't understand the mysteries of karma. So when we feel outraged by karma, by the idea of karma, by saying, well, I'm not just going to believe that something bad happened to somebody because, that they did something bad in the past. Why a person who is an eternal spiritual being who can't actually die or can't actually be hurt by anything in the grand scheme of reality goes through any kind of experience whatsoever from the standpoint of our temporal material body and mind is not going to make sense to us a lot of the time. So what sages have told us in different traditions, Buddhist, yogic, throughout history, is that the workings of fate, the workings of destiny, the working of the laws of the universe are deeply mysterious, but they are benevolent ultimately. They can be trusted ultimately. But it's not easy to trust them. It's not easy to trust the mystery. It's not easy to put our faith into this process. If we don't decide at some point for ourselves that we are living in an inherently divine, beautiful, and trustworthy reality. For me, this was a non-negotiable. I personally, as a person of faith, realize that I have to believe that I have a soul, that it's eternal, that I'm not my body ultimately, that this place is sacred, and that there are deep reasons for us being here that are good. So those faith statements are important because they allow us to accept that karma is multiple and that karma is mysterious. people who try to give pat answers as to why something good or bad happens to someone are not bringing us any closer to God, because it's presumptuous. In bhakti, we say, look, if you get something good, materially speaking, the attitude should be, I probably did not deserve that. I'm not feeling entitled to that. And if something bad happens, the attitude is, thank you. What's the message? What's the lesson? What's the gift here? And it could have been worse. And that as much as possible, if we adopt that attitude, we start fostering the consciousness that's capable of seeing just glimpses of the sophistication of karma and of the mystery of karma. So it requires a certain kind of faith to be able to see and understand these things. And also, again, just to reiterate that this view of karma, its sophistication and its mystery, is ancient. So there's never really been a time where the explanation of karma is as simple as just, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. It's never really been like that. That's a misunderstanding. So anyway, the final point, let me just pause again. So long as we are not choosing to spiritualize our consciousness through devotional practices, the view of bhakti is that karma will tend to feel more mechanistic, more punitive, more impersonal. So that if, on the other hand, if we are living lives of devotion and faith, then we start to see the mystery. We start to get glimpses of the truth, beauty, goodness flowing through all things. We start to receive the mercy and grace of all difficulties. We remain humble when good things come, because we're more interested in our personal soulful relationship to our source than to the comings and goings of karma, because we realize the answer isn't in karma. The answer is in our relationship to the source of energy, of life, of love. We call it Krishna in bhakti, flowing through all things, and that we want to draw our consciousness closer to that source, because then all of the experiences that we have become divine. And until then, it's going to feel like an unfair, mind-boggling, impersonal, mechanistic reality. The power structures, hierarchies, power struggles between people and groups of people and individuals will dominate, and they will not be fair, and it will not feel like we live in a universe that is beautiful, just, good, or true. So it requires faith. It requires the heart giving itself to God in love and devotion. That's the real meaning of yoga. There's so many different ways we do that. In bhakti, we chant every day. We read stories about God. We talk about God. We sing. We dance. We offer food. We keep a home altar. All these practices that keep us in remembrance, so that we see God in everything. That gives us the eyes to see we start. The saints in tradition say, "Give me a million eyes so I can see you everywhere. Give me a million ears so I can hear you everywhere." We can't enter into the sacredness of karma that transcends this idea of transaction, good and bad. Get something good because you did something good. Get something bad because you did something bad. This way of understanding karma really starts to fade and disappear when we deepen our relationship with the divine. So the last thing that I'll say is that this deepening our relationship with God does not translate into not being socially active either, fighting injustice, fighting the good fight, so to speak. In fact, it should motivate us to be a servant of peace and goodness and truth and beauty and justice in the world. how we do that while also seeing the absolute beauty and perfection in all things, even the ones that look bad, is the art of fighting the spiritual fight, being fully accepting of things as they are in every moment, while also doing our level best to make a better world. That's the art of yoga. So all of this is not to say that we should sit back and be like, well, it's all good, and people who think there's problems in the world really just aren't seeing things. Like that would not be true either. Which is why at the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, um, Arjuna's sitting there having to decide whether or not to fight in a battle, and Krishna ultimately instructs him that yoga is about fighting, is how you fight the battle. So karma is multiple, karma is mysterious. We can learn to see God in all karma when we put our faith in the yogic experience, in the yogic practice. And that can help us to take action in the world that's just, even as we are able to see God in absolutely everything, even the hardest and most difficult of circumstances. So that's my little bhakti sharing for the day. I think we did it. I think I handled that question. I was really scared. I just want you all to know that if I appear, all confident and self-assured in these answers, it's not because I feel that way. I try to keep it together while I'm talking and present the best answers that I can, that I've been taught, that I believe in, that I put my heart into. But that's a really tough question. And it's not one that I have an intellectual defense against. I try to invite that question back in as often as I feel it and really let it sit there, because it's not an enemy to have that question. It's a deep beneficial friend to us to struggle with that question. And it's okay to struggle with that question too. So anyway, hopefully this was helpful. I hope you guys have a very beautiful day, and I'll be back to regular bhakti stuff next week when I'm home. Hare Krishna.